In this lesson, we are going to solve quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. The first thing we'd like to do is take a quick review of something that we've already done, and that is factoring or using the square root. When we look for these answers, we are asking you to solve, and that means to find the values of x. So if we were to find the values of x for the first equation here, we know that we would have to move the 3 over to the other side to get everything equal to 0. X squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. We would factor that in any way that you would like to factor it at all, box method, reverse distribution, whatever, and we would get two values for x. In this one, we could do the same situation, move this over, take out the GCF, but another way we know that we learned how to do these is to divide and take the square root. And that would also get us two values because we know if we take the square root, we get the positive and negative. So that's two ways that we have learned so far how to solve for x. But what happens if we can't nicely take the square root or we can't nicely factor it out? That's what we're going to be taking a look at in this lesson today. What we're looking at is something called the quadratic formula. And this gives us the solutions, x equals two of them for our quadratics, but in a much bigger equation. I don't have my microphone on anymore because I couldn't get it to work last time, so hopefully this works this time. This is a video slash song that we really think that you guys are going to, one, enjoy, and two, help you memorize this formula because it's huge. There's a lot of steps, there's a lot of things in between, there's a lot of letters, quite a, two numbers, I guess. But this song hopefully will catch up and stick in your head and help you remember this formula. So here it goes.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Okay, so once again, I hope that worked this time, and I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to move on to some examples. We want to remind you that we have to start in standard form every time we use this equation. So we notice that in our first example here, we are in fact in standard form. The next thing we'd like to do is label our A, B, and C points. So we have A here, which we know if there isn't anything is just a 1, B, and C. Then we will plug in the values to our equation. X equals negative B, which is 5, plus or minus the square root. B squared is 5 squared, minus 4ac, a is just 1, c is negative 6, all over 2a. Again, our a is just 1, but we're going to put it in there just so that we remember. The next thing we do is solve or simplify. So we have x equals negative 5 plus the square root of 49 all over 2. Now, oops, this is plus or minus. Remember, we have the plus or minus in the middle here, meaning we have two solutions. So we have x equals negative 5 plus the square root of 49 over 2, which we know is 7. And that's why it's plus or minus. And we have x equals negative 5 minus 7 over 2. So these are our two answers. That's how we solved. Notice that our last set of directions tells us to round to the nearest hundredth. So that's what we're going to do. Plug this into your calculator. Negative 5 plus 7, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So our first solution is x equals 1, and our second solution is negative 6. And this is how your answers should appear. Now notice that these are pretty nice numbers, and if you look up to the equation, we probably could have factored that to begin with. We just wanted to practice, and so most of the time in these other ones, we're not going to have such nice round answers, and rounding to the nearest hundredth is going to be really nice for us to be able to do. So our second example, we notice that it is not in standard form, so we're going to move that 5 over, adding 5 to both sides. We get negative 3x squared plus x plus 5 equals 0. Next thing we want to do is plug in our numbers into our formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4ac, negative 3 and 5, all over 2a, which is again negative 3. Simplify. X equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 61 all over negative 6. Once again, if you take a look, we have two different answers, plus and minus. So we have x equals negative 1 plus the square root of 61 over negative 6. And we have x equals negative 1 minus the square root of 61 over negative 6. Solve those. We want to round to the nearest hundredth. So we are left with x is approximately 1.47 and x is approximately negative 1.14. Those are our two answers rounded to the nearest hundredth. Okay. If we take a look at our next examples, notice the directions say find the x-intercepts of the graph. If you remember from the previous lessons, finding the x-intercepts only means that we're plugging 0 in for our y, which is something that we were already doing to begin with. We just want you to know that you should not be intimidated by different directions. If you know what it means, you're doing the same exact thing. So first we'll label our a, b, and c. Secondly, we want to plug those values in. X equals negative b plus or minus square root. Oops, I didn't even write the b value. I'm just singing along the song. Negative b is 3 plus or minus the square root. B squared is 9 minus 4ac. A is 1, c is 8, all over 2, and a, which is 1. So simplify, we get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 41, and this should have been a negative 8. If you want to correct that quickly, okay? And then all over just 2. Once again, we have two answers here. So if we have negative 3 plus square root of 41 over 2, we get approximately 1.70. And yes, we have to have the 0 here because our directions say to the nearest hundredth. And our second answer is going to be negative 4.70. And those are your two answers for x. One last example here. Notice we are not yet in standard form. That's okay. Just move that 1 over. 2x squared plus 8x minus 1 equals 0. We are finding the x-intercepts. We are equal to 0, so that's okay. And if we look, okay, so we have negative b, which is 8, plus or minus the square root. B squared is 64 minus 4ac, which is 2 and negative 1. all over 2a, which is 2. Simplify -8 plus or minus the square root of 72 over 4. Here's a common question. Can we simplify this? Absolutely not. Why? Because these two things are addends. We have a plus and a minus in between. Do not simplify this. Leave it as is. Solve it in your calculator. Otherwise, you're going to get a completely wrong answer, and I am going to be very sad. So, we have two answers. X equals about 0.12 and 4.12. If you remember, we're looking for the x-intercepts in these questions. So if you'd like to write it in intercept is 1.700, -4.700, because remember our y value is 0 when we're finding x-intercepts. And secondly, 0.120 and 4.120. And that would be a sufficient answer. Last thing we want to do, just a quick review here, our quadratic formula, x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There is a fun song. Listen to it again if you want to. Just YouTube the quadratic formula to Pop Goes the Weasel. And secondly, we want to remind you that we have to start in standard form every single time before plugging our values in. List of steps here. First, label A, B, and C in your standard form equation. Second, plug the values into the quadratic formula. Third, simplify and solve. And last, round to the nearest hundredth. There is one other thing that I'd like to point out. If you enjoyed the song, which I know you probably did, and you have some free time, this is a different song that I don't think you've heard yet. It's called Teach Me How to Factor, and I do think that you'll quite enjoy it.